Hello, hello, and welcome to Modern Musicology with Alan and Anthony.
Howdy.
How are you?
I am doing well, thank you. I don't know where the last few days have gone, but otherwise I'm doing great.
So we are sadly not joined tonight by Rob, who is in Chicago for his birthday. Happy birthday, Rob.
Happy
Say happy birthday.
birthday.
I was like, are you
getting there.
going to join in or not?
I wasn't sure if you were saying more or not.
So
we might have got a long tribute then.
Yeah, no, just a happy birthday. We miss you, Rob. Anyway, we'll see Rob again next week. But Anthony and I are going to take an opportunity to talk about one of our favorite subjects, prog rock.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I think that in one of our previous shows, we talked about how you got into prog. Is that right?
We did. I think it was when we talked about our most important musical year.
Exactly. So what was the first prog group that you really latched onto?
Oh, it was Genesis. I mean, I was aware of Pink Floyd because it was pretty difficult not to be. Growing up in the UK, I was aware of Another Brick in the Wall. I was aware of Money and Time. I think those were the three Pink Floyd songs when growing up. It was fairly difficult to get away from. And I always kind of liked Pink Floyd, but it was never quite enough to make me go, I have to track down more of this.
Exactly.
As I think I said previously, 2005, I'd gone through about 4 years of exclusively listening to heavy metal. And a friend of mine sent me very kindly Genesis's their platinum collection 3-disc set that had all those gorgeous remastered tracks on it prior to them remastering their entire catalog. And of course, the track that drew me in, based on where I was musically at the time, was The Knife, because it's got that wonderful bit at the end that, as a metalhead, I was like, ooh.
Right.
Ooh, this sounds like the kind of stuff Sabbath were doing at the time, kind of. And so I got listening to that third disc, which was all the Peter Gabriel era stuff, and I suddenly realized there was a heavy bit in the musical box. There was a heavy bit in Supper's Ready. And just it was almost like this slow burn where, as I got more into those, I started appreciating the less heavy parts of those songs. And then that led me into, well, I guess I'll give Firth of Fifth a try. I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe, The Lamb. And then I started listening to the other discs as well. And it just slowly over time just drew me in. And the next thing I knew, Marillion do this thing called Crash Course. And at the time, it's now online, but at the time, you could basically go onto their website, put it in your cart, and it was free. All you had to do was pay postage, and they would send you a sampler CD, basically. And everyone had said to me, Marillion are basically Genesis Mark II.
Right.
So I did that, and I didn't think they sounded that much like Genesis. Some of their early stuff, there's a little crossover, but I really liked that as well. And one thing led to another, and I started listening to more Yes, I started listening to King Crimson. Rush, I know, are technically prog, but they're a little heavier. I mean, I guess if you truly want to ask, my first prog loves was probably Dream Theater and Rush.
Wow.
Before Genesis, because they appeal to metalheads.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
Getting away from that and that obvious heavy metal connection into something a bit more mainstream, if you can ever call prog mainstream, it was those two bands. How about yourself?
Right there.
Yeah, that was my first two.
I grew up a Kiss head. I mean, just complete Kiss. I had my bedroom was absolutely covered with Kiss posters, to the point where I put a little I made a little paper plaque with the number 100 on it for the 100th poster that I hung. And they were on like every wall, like there you couldn't see the wall
Wow.
color anymore. They were just like plastered. And then went across the ceiling, partly across the ceiling, and I made a second little plaque with the number 150 on it. So I was eat up with Kiss. And at some point, like I don't remember. I remember kind of where it was, but I don't remember what grade I was in. But a friend loaned me "Fly By Night," Rush's second album, and I did not know what to make of that. But it blew me away, and it was nothing like anything I had ever heard before. So I really got kind of interested in hearing more, and I think it was a different friend loaned me 2112, and that blew my mind. Like, um, I just never heard anything like it, not even remotely like it. And I studied it. I studied the lyrics, and of course, the drummer was the lyricist,
Mhm.
and that really caught my interest because being a drummer myself, and that's where my love of writing came from Neil Peart. Like he inspired me to like improve on drumming, but he also inspired me to really get into writing. Um, and so 2112 really like made me think completely differently about music, about how music is structured, about time signatures, about thematic material that runs throughout, about a song doesn't have to be 3.5 minutes and tailored for radio. You know,
Mhm.
the title suite spans the entire side one of the album, and I had just
And
never experienced anything like that before.
and I think that first side is so interesting because it moves, I don't want to say through genres, but through different levels of heaviness.
Yeah,
And to your point, Alan, it's what is it, five different movements? I mean, it's almost structured more like a classical piece.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think that was the wake up for me as well,
Hmm.
because similar story. Someone actually sent me, because this was a few years later, a burned MP3 disc with I think half of Rush's back catalog on it, and
Nice.
obviously once I heard 2112, I thought this is incredible. I have to support this band, and so I went and actually bought it.
Hmm.
I actually
Right.
think I asked for it for Christmas, but
But it got paid for somehow.
someone bought it for me because
Right.
I'm a big believer. Even today, if I hear something on Spotify that I really enjoy, I
Hmm.
know the artist gets peanuts for that, so I'm
Totally.
going to go and buy it on vinyl.
Agreed.
And similar situation back then, but that 2112 is just mind blowing.
Yeah. And especially as young as I was when I first heard it. I mean, when you're going from, like the main thing, like on radio, I listened to like, at the time, things like ABBA were happening. And,
Mhm.
and I was a big McCartney and Wings fan. And, just things like that. So, my radio listening was at top 40. So it was all over disco was happening and all this nonsense. And then to be given 2112, I mean, that is, you know, just like horizon expanding, you
That's
know,
like third eye opening.
exactly like that. Like, I mean, because it really, it's so imagery heavy. It doesn't just, it's not just a song about, hitting the dance floor or,
Mhm.
being a dancing queen or any of that stuff. It like opens these vistas that you would never, I mean, it was
Yeah.
like watching a movie, you know?
Well, it's interesting you talk about from a drummer's perspective. That's
Mm,
what brought you in. And from my perspective, I had maybe picked up the bass a year before I heard 2112.
yeah.
So similar story. Geddy Lee, not
Yeah.
only is he um, playing bass, he's singing in that unique voice. And I've tried, and I certainly can't do it while playing bass. I can barely do it while just sitting here.
Right.
And then on top of that, live, he's playing bass pedals with his feet. And these guys are just such insane musicians. musicians.
The thing that blows me away about Getty is that he doesn't always sing things the same way. He will improvise, he will stretch his melody, he will change the way he does it, but in time with the music, like he's still playing. Like I don't know, that boggles
Yeah,
my mind how you can possibly do that. And
but all three of them,
oh my
wow.
God, unbelievable. There's that bit in there's so much of Alex in that whole album, but on that side one piece, I mean, he's just incredible, because I grew up obviously an Ace Frehley fan,
Mhm.
and Alex was just like a completely different level.
Oh, 100%.
Oh my
You
God.
know, it's interesting because I enjoyed what I heard of Rush, but I would still describe Genesis as my first progressive love,
Hmm. Hmm.
followed by Marillion, and then through Marillion, I kind of tangentially heard of this band called Porcupine Tree,
Oh my gosh.
and because they toured with Marillion, Steven Wilson produced Radiation, which was
Yeah.
Marillion's 10th album, and then in 2007, I think they released an album called Fear of a Blank Planet,
Hmm.
and Alex Lifeson laid down a solo for Anesthetize, which is their 16-minute epic in the middle of the album.
Hmm.
And of course, hearing that name and then knowing the Marillion connection, I picked up that album. And again, that was another one of those holy shit moments. Um, and another progressive obsession of mine was inculcated in my brain.
Right. Right.
But again, because of Alex Lifeson and his insane guitar playing.
Hmm. So once I kind of got into like the Rush sort of mentality, my next step was Yes, and I would say that they are still my first love, my not first as far as like when I got into them, but first as like top of the pyramid. As far as prog goes, they are
It
the pinnacle for me.
it's like Rush with a gateway drug that helped you discover Yes.
It did. It really did. Not only Yes, but like everything prog, originates from me being given that copy of 2112 whenever that was
So
78, 79, something like that.
so what was it about Yes in particular that drew you in there?
The first thing that I ever got was Classic Yes, which was sort of a greatest hits album kind of thing that came out
Mm-hmm.
in 1980. Um, and I had heard, well, I knew a couple of, I mean, because I grew up listening to Top 40 radio in the 70s. So I heard Roundabout, you know, as it was happening on the radio, which is just bonkers to think that Top 40 radio used to play stuff like Roundabout, you know, and
Yeah,
Stairway to Heaven is stuff. I mean, it's just mind blowing that that's what used to, all the stuff that we think of as classic rock used to be like new hits on Top 40 radio, going up the Billboard charts and all this kind of crazy stuff. So
right.
anyway, yeah. So the first thing I got was that greatest hits thing, and stuff like Heart of the Sunrise um, was a little bit harder for me to grasp at first. But the more I listened to it, the more I really sort of understood it. And they have sort of a more organic feel, I guess. Um, and it's much more, as like we were talking about 2112 being sort of like classically inspired. Yes, definitely is more symphonic, and especially when you get into the longer things like Close to the Edge and Gates of Delirium, which of course I've got that one hanging up right there too. And
Mm-hmm.
then the entire Tales album, Tales from Topographic Oceans. You have themes that run through all of those pieces, and it's again another like extension of how to think about music. And so it's because of this stuff that I got so heavily into classical music later on. Majored in music and music history, and like spent afternoons breaking apart a symphony and studying its development and thematic material. And oh my gosh, loved it so much. So, I can thank Yes and Rush for getting me into Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn and, Stravinsky and all these things. So
We should do a classical episode at some point. I would be down for that.
I'd love that. Because there's
Um,
so much, like, you can trace, like, particularly in Prague, you can trace back to very specific classical roots.
yeah,
There's a
it's
lot that
interesting,
they're with Yes that are really Stravinsky inspired. Go ahead, sorry.
but it's interesting. You listen to Yes, and you listen to particularly King Crimson, and I feel with
Mm,
those bands, there's just as much jazz in there as there is classical.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So
100%
that's where
agree.
you start getting the widdly keyboard solos and shit like that I really enjoy. I say shit like that. That's not to denigrate them. But you know what I mean.
Hmm.
It
Yeah,
it brings in a multitude of influences and melds them all together to spit out something unique.
right. I had one of my friends posted something. Joe Monticello, actually,
Mhm.
one of our mutual friends, posted something. I think it was yesterday about people who say that people perceive Prague as being pretentious and overblown, and his post particularly was about somebody who said that it lacked the rebellion that rock and roll is built on. And I think that's not true. I think that it absolutely rebelled against um, the top 40 structure of music. Like, songs don't have to be 3.5 minutes. It's rebelled against commerciality. It rebelled against a constrained song structure, and it
Yeah.
definitely embraced the freedom of thought and freedom of expression, and taking an idea to an extent, to as far as you can take it.
Well, with that, let's think about specifically Piper at the Gates of Dawn,
Okay.
Pink Floyd.
Yep.
So that came out in 1967.
Yeah.
I
Unbelievable,
mean,
isn't it?
you want to talk about rebelling against the status quo? Holy shit.
I know. Yeah, absolutely.
Something off of that. I mean, Bike is a little bit more of a
Hmm.
bop. You can kind of imagine that. But Astronomy
Yeah.
Domine or Power
Mm.
R Tok Her, Tok H,
Hmm.
I at the time, where were the Beatles at that point? They hadn't even done Sergeant Pepper yet. This is some bonkers stuff going on.
Yeah.
Had they done
Yeah.
Sergeant Pepper? Was that 67 or
That
68?
was Sergeant Pepper was it was
I'm looking this
67.
up.
It was 67 because it came out the same time that Bowie's first album did.
So Sergeant Pepper was May 26th in 67. You're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And this came out. Piper at the Gates of Dawn came out 4 months later in August.
Oh my gosh.
But you compare
Crazy.
them, and yeah, the Beatles were experimenting from their
Hmm.
usual stuff, but this I
Hmm.
feel is just on another level. And again, to your point, this is rebelling against the status quo.
Hmm.
And I think what Joe, where people have the attitude that Joe was mentioning, is you look at a lot of these bands, and particularly Genesis. I feel like Genesis are the band people hone in on because they were founded at Charterhouse School when they were still
Mm.
schoolboys. And
Yeah.
Charterhouse is one of the old establishment private boarding schools in
Yeah.
England. So I think people equate that, their background, against something like punk, which was a very working class movement, and
Yeah.
assume that because something tends to have a little more of an upper class background to it, it's not rebelling. It's
Yeah.
more establishment. And I don't
Right.
think that's true.
Right.
They might not be political in the same way as, say, the Sex Pistols are in their
Hmm.
lyrics, but
Hmm.
you look at what they're doing musically, and it's 100% a statement against the musical status quo.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Have you ever heard a band called Voivod and their cover of Astronomy Domine?
I've heard of Voivod. I have because I think Jason Newsted, formerly of Metallica, was in Voivod for about 5 minutes. I've not heard their cover.
Oh, it's so good. I used to the band I used to be in, Hyperdrive. We did Astronomy Domine for a while, and we sort of patterned it after the Voivod cover because it was heavier. Oh my God, so much fun! That is a hell of a song to play. So when are we going to start our prog tribute band?
Do you have time right now? You've got
No,
two bands going on already.
I know, but it's
And I would
prog.
actually have to practice my bass to do that rather than having it sitting prettily in a stand behind me for my work conference calls.
But at least it
Good
serves a
talking point.
purpose.
Next to my wine fridge, I get a lot of comments about that.
Nice. Have you heard of a band? It's one of the more recent prog bands. They're called IQ.
I have heard of them. I don't think I've heard anything by them.
I love them. They're sort of like the Peter Gabriel Genesis in as much as Marillion is, so not quite in the same way that Marillion is. They're very different from Marillion, but they have similarities to that Peter Gabriel Genesis era.
So
And
I want to ask you, Alan, for a second. When you say they're a more modern band, are we talking?
Well, right. And I almost qualified that when I said it. Within the last 20 years.
Okay.
Okay, so they've got a like a string of albums midway through their catalog. They started in like 83-ish.
Okay, they were the same time as Marillion.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking that they kind of came up with the same influences that Marillion did. But like in the 90s is when they really, really take off for me. There's an album called Subterranea, which is fantastic.
Okay.
The Seventh House in 2000 is excellent. But my absolute favorite album by them is Dark Matter. 2004. It is a spectacular album. The first track, Sacred Sound, is just under 12 minutes, and the whole of side one is just phenomenal. And then side two has this big 24-minute epic on it called Harvest of Souls, which I think that you would enjoy. So I would definitely recommend giving that a try.
So I have got their Wikipedia entries open as a reminder to listen to them when I'm not in meetings.
Right. Very nice. So what are some of the other like more recent bands that you are into? Like you mentioned Dream Theater, they are sort of from that same era.
They are, and what I think is interesting is in the 80s, prog almost split in two directions.
Yeah.
Right. So you had the very the kind of metal tinge side that Dream Theater went with.
Mm-hmm.
But then you almost had this kind of folk type strand as well. Mm-hmm. And one of the bands I've really been enjoying, they've just put out a new album, is a band called Big Big Train.
Okay.
And they're, for want of a better term, I guess a super group. At various times, they've had Nick DiVigilio on drums. He played on Genesis's Calling All Stations.
Yes.
And I think he was in Spock's Beard for a while.
He was Spock's Beard, basically.
Yeah.
When Neil Morse, who kind of ran the band, left, Nick took over as the lead vocalist. And I mean, he's brilliant.
So he's part of Big Big Train. Dave Gregory, who was in XTC, was in Big Big Train for a while, and they're just so fascinating as a band because they're prog, but they're a little bit folky. My favorite album of theirs was called Folklore, and that came out in, I guess, the mid 2010s, maybe. I think it was maybe 2016. And I remember a year or two ago, whenever it was, that Taylor Swift released an album called Folklore.
Yes.
I saw a ton of posts on social media with everyone going, "Oh my God, Folklore, it's amazing." And I was like, wow, all of these really unexpected people are discovering Big Big Train. I'm really impressed. No.
Oh, that's hilarious.
They were not. The other band I really like, And then more on the metal side is a band called Heiken.
Mm,
That's Haken. They were founded, I want to say, in the mid 2000s, and they've
hmm
done some really, really interesting stuff. They kind of take what Dream Theater and Porcupine Tree did, but they also
hmm
blend in some of the styles of the lesser known 70s stuff.
mm.
You listen carefully, there's a bit of like Gentle Giant in there.
Okay.
And they're fascinating. And they're young guys. I say young, they're about my age.
That's
Which
young to me.
it is, but now I'm seeing the next generation come up and I'm just thinking, man,
Yeah.
I feel old.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine how you're feeling, Alan.
Oh, thank you so much.
But they're good fun. And then the other more modern band I really like is an Australian band, and they've gone down the more psychedelic path, and that's a band called King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
I have heard of them.
And
I
they
have not
put
heard
out like,
anything by them. I need to dig that up.
well, there's a lot. I mean, they're
Yeah.
only about 10 years old, but they put out something like 2 albums a year. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I can't keep up with them. It's very, very impressive.
Wow.
But what I've heard, I've really, really enjoyed.
Okay. You were talking about Dream Theater a few minutes ago, and they came up like late '80s and right at the beginning of the '90s. They were really sort of hitting their
Hmm.
stride. And IQ came up around that same time. It's interesting that that's the time that established prog bands were really sort of leaving prog behind in a way. Genesis had really like solidified into the Phil Collins years, Invisible Touch and all that stuff. And there's a little like prog element to it, with Domino and stuff like that. Kansas is, doing, the radio hits. Yes is doing 90125 and that kind of stuff. So, in sort of that vacuum, all these new bands kind of like move in and take up the prog standard.
What's really interesting is of those prog bands that come up at that time, I think from kind of the late 80s. I mean, Dream Theater were late 80s, but they didn't really get going until, I want to say 92, 93. But you started to get those bands, Dream Theater, Spock's Beard,
Yeah.
Anathema, The Pineapple Thief,
Yeah.
um,
Oh man, I forgot
even,
about Pineapple Thief.
e-
Holy
even
cow.
even Tool or Opeth or the Flower Kings.
Hmm.
They were all coming up at this time when this music was once again deeply unpopular. Grunge was the
Mm,
big thing,
yeah.
followed by post grunge and the alternative rock scene. And yet
Hmm.
these bands came forward with the influences of classic prog, a little bit of heavy metal, and they're just, it's the kind of thing, nobody likes us, but we don't care.
And so once again, rebellion,
Exactly.
rebelling against what the popular statement is at that moment. And
100%.
individuality, we're going to do our shit because we want to do it. And we know
Yeah,
that there are people who want to hear it. And if Yes isn't going to do it anymore, somebody's got to.
right.
So, I mean, so I without a doubt, I'm in the rebellion of Prague camp.
But I think you make a really interesting point. I think the only classic prog band at that time who were still doing progressive things were Pink Floyd. You know, they put out
Hmm.
the Division Bell as their last
Hmm.
album, which is a
Hmm.
phenomenal album.
Hmm.
But you look at what Yes were doing, you look at what Genesis were doing, even
Yeah.
King Crimson, it's just not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
They went
And
mainstream.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, and there's some point where bands have to evolve in order to survive, that kind of thing. But we're at that point also where Rush is starting to really leave some of their prog leanings behind. When you get into the '90s, Rush is doing some great stuff, very guitar oriented stuff, but nothing that you would say is prog. You know, they are
No,
a hard they're a hard rock band that's inspired by Rush.
I mean,
And
I even
that's not to like speak against it because I love a lot of Rush's '90s stuff.
I really like Roll the Bones.
Hmm. I didn't at first, but I really came around to it.
I don't know, the title track just speaks to me for some reason, even if it does have the amazing lyric of "Why are we here? Because we're here. Roll the bones."
I mean,
But
makes
it's catchy.
perfect sense to me. Makes perfect sense. There's some other stuff like Driven came out a few years after that. The Counterparts album is I also didn't like at first. The first single from that was Stick It Out, and I hated that song. But when I picked up the album, the first track on the album is Animate, and I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. So, they always found a way, even, as different as they would go each album, they always found a way to like hook me in. So I still love
Right.
my 90s and my 2000s Rush.
I think I remember when I was vaguely aware of Rush when Vaporwaves came out, and that was a pretty big thing. Actually, bizarrely in the Doctor Who community at the time, I remember a few people plugging the shit out of that album on Outpost Gallifrey.
Really?
Yeah, there were like 2 or 3 people who set their avatar to the album work and put quotes from it in their signature and all that kind of stuff.
Wow. That's surprising. That was the first album they had done in 5 years, and it was the first one back after, Neil went through the death of his family members and, his sabbatical. And so it was a big deal. I never really got into that album. I just don't find it easy to really get into. So, what was the last prog show you saw?
Steven Wilson.
Oh,
I saw him at what's that little theater in Little Five? Is it the Variety Playhouse?
yeah.
Yeah, I saw him at the
Or is it?
Variety Play.
Or are you talking about the Tabernacle?
No, no.
Variety. Okay.
Yeah, Little 5 Points. Yeah, it's the Variety.
Oh, Variety. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my god! I mean, he played a mix of his solo stuff plus some Porcupine Tree,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he played "Sign of the Times" by Prince, if I recall.
Well, now
Because
that's interesting.
specifically because he was in Atlanta, that was
Mm-hmm.
his tribute to Prince, who's, as you know, last show was here.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Wow.
but to me, I missed the opportunity to see Porcupine Tree because
Yeah.
when I lived in London, I was a poor student and couldn't afford to go see them. And then I moved here, and after I moved here, they didn't come to the US again. So they
Yeah.
split. Steven Wilson came here, and he played a few Porcupine Tree tracks,
Mm-hmm.
as I mentioned, one of which was Arriving Somewhere But Not Here
Oh
off his
my God,
Deadwing album.
man, I
And
love that.
I got so emotional
Yeah.
at hearing that. I was sitting next to my, at the time, boss, who's a massive prog fan as well. And I was like holding back a tear,
Mm.
just being so happy to be
Right.
able to hear this track.
Right. All
It
right.
was incredible. How about
Speaking of
you?
shows, well, speaking of shows, this is going to be maybe a tough topic. What are your thoughts about the current Genesis tour?
I saw Genesis in 2007 when they
Yeah.
did the Turn It On Again tour,
Yeah.
and it was spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen footage from the Last Domino, and it's hard to watch.
It is.
It's hard to see Phil sitting down. It's hard to see him so off key.
Yeah.
And candidly, it feels like a money grab.
Yeah. I mean,
You
I
know,
really hate to think that of them, but
the Turn It On Again tour was the perfect end. You
yeah.
had Phil in great form.
Yeah.
You had him. You had that '80s live lineup of Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, Phil Collins, with Daryl Stromer and
Mm-hmm.
Tony Thompson,
Yeah.
as name of the drummer. You had those drum duets. It was basically a blowout 80s style, maybe early 90s style show, really showcasing the best of Genesis. And what you're seeing now, and maybe they've got better as the tour's gone on, but what you're seeing now is not the best of Genesis.
Yeah.
And I just think, why?
I know. I know. I will say that I think Phil's son, Nick, is like slaying the drums on
Mhm.
the clips that I've seen. He's really doing some good stuff. But man, is it hard to watch. But I
Yeah.
mean, they can do it because they will fill venues with people who will spend the ridiculous amounts of money that they're charging for this.
I'm not paying $250 to see that.
No, no, no,
I
not at
think I
all.
paid £80 to see them in 2007.
Yeah.
Maybe it
Wow.
was 60, but somewhere around that. I say I
Hmm.
paid. My mother paid for myself, her, and my girlfriend at the time to go and see them. But
Nice.
my mum's a big Genesis fan too.
That's cool.
And my dad would never go with her because he doesn't listen to that noise. Anything past 68, no, he's not listening. But I don't get why you would pay to see something that's clearly such a pale imitation of what they used to be.
Right, right. Um, there's this tribute band. They're called Abacab. Have you heard of this?
I've not, but I have seen other Genesis tribute bands.
Hmm.
The Musical Box
The
seems to
man,
be the biggest one.
the musical box is unbelievable. They stick to Gabriel era Genesis. They don't do anything past
I think
Lamb,
they've done.
and they
I
do
think
the
they've done
Lamb album,
Seconds
and it's
Out. I think they've
oh,
done Seconds Out.
really? Because I was going to
Hmm.
say this band that I'm talking about, Abacab, has done the entire Seconds Out album, and they'll do anything. They do Phil solo stuff and Peter solo stuff, and they do modern Genesis. And I don't think they've ever actually done anything from Calling All Stations. That's
No
the
one
only
does
thing
anything
that.
from Calling All Stations.
Oh, I love that album.
I love it too. The
I
Dividing Line is a
Yeah,
phenomenal track.
I think that the title track is fantastic.
I even like Congo, and
I
I
do
will
too.
fight you on that.
No, you don't have to
I
fight
don't
me,
need to
man. I
fight
like
you.
it too.
We will
but
fight
uh,
anyone
but
else.
but they're really good. I think they're either North or South Carolina, and they do shows in Atlanta. A few times a year. So when they come
Let me know.
down,
I'm there.
we'll see them. We're going.
Um, I remember I used to go like this band that was more or less a Southeast England band called Genesis in the Cage.
Ooh.
They used to call themselves In the Cage, and apparently it got a ton of people thinking that they were a fetish act, so they actually had to put Genesis in front of their name. But
That's
they always said
fantastic.
they formed when they were a Genesis show in the late 80s,
Mm.
and upon hearing everyone, not everyone, but a large swathe of the audience calling for In the Air Tonight, they
Oh.
realized that they would probably never hear Supper's Ready again live. So they
Oh,
decided
right.
to do it
Never.
themselves.
Never.
Um,
Mm.
and they were great. They were better on some songs than others. Naturally,
Hmm.
they were phenomenal on In the Cage. They did a good Supper's Ready, but they played
Mm.
some slightly lesser known tracks. I remember they did a great Fountain of Salmakis.
Oh my God. I love that song. Love it.
I think they even did Harold the Barrel at one point.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
So
any last thing that you can think of that we haven't talked about that you want to get in? Any last favorite album or band that we haven't mentioned that you think people should listen to?
so this is where I get on my soapbox.
Soap.
Marillion.
There you go.
Two out. So for anyone watching, all like six of our viewers who haven't or are not familiar with Marillion, there are basically two eras. They've had two singers. The first one was a gentleman who went by the name of Fish. The second one is a guy called Steve Hogarth, and they're very distinct sounds. So Clutching at Straws is, in my opinion, the best album with Fish.
Mm.
Absolutely phenomenal. very heart-wrenching at times. There are songs on there that will make you laugh. There are songs that will make you cry. There are songs that will see you at the bottom of a bottle of Johnny Walker. Fish is Scottish, by the way. So I've certainly cried my way down to the bottle of down a bottle of Johnny Walker with that album. Anyway, from the Hogarth era, there's an album called Brave, and the instructions on the back say, "Listen to it loud with the lights out. Do it. It's a journey. It's emotional." Steve Hogarth, the singer, nearly quit at the end of the tour because he was so emotionally drained by performing that album in its entirety, night after night. It will get you. There are certain things, if you've ever been through a really, really nasty breakup where someone has thoroughly betrayed you, that album will speak to your heart.
Wow.
And it's candidly one of the best things I've ever heard. And Stephen Wilson remixed it 2 years ago, and it sounds amazing. So shout out to both of those albums, and then Porcupine Tree's Dead Wing is the other one.
Yeah, that's a good.
How about you, Alan?
All right, so one you mentioned them earlier. One of my favorite bands is Spock's Beard, and I discovered them right around 2000, and oddly enough, they played at Dragon Con. The album that was out at that time, their newest album was it's called V. It's also the Roman numeral 5 because it was their 5th album. But so that album was out, and that album blew me away. It is so massively good. And so I was on this real high. The opening track is like 16-minute At the End of the Day. Fantastic song. And then again, like we were talking about with IQ or whoever it was, side 2 has this massive 27-minute song called The Great Nothing, which is sort of this epic tale of the universal force that is music. And it is amazing. And so they played at Dragon Con. So I got to see them basically for free because I had my Dragon Con membership. But they were phenomenal. They played almost everything from that album, plus, good stuff from their previous albums. So everyone should check out V/5 by Spock's
On my
Beard.
list for tomorrow.
It is so amazing. So amazing.
Can we tangent for a second?
Yeah. Tangent all you want.
Dragon Con gets some surprisingly impressive bands. I feel like it's been a few years, but I know, as you say, Spock's Beard have played, Jefferson Starship have played Dragon Con.
That was amazing. Yeah, Blue Oyster Cult was at the very first Dragon Con.
And didn't they bring in Michael Moorcock to do Veteran of the Psychic Wars with them?
Yes.
Something ridiculous like that?
Right.
Can we get another ridiculously good band at Dragon Con again sometime soon?
Oh, man. I don't know, man. I mean, I wish. The best things that I've seen in the last decade, well, there was a band called Faith and the Muse, which are kind of gothy, kind of goth wave kind of thing. And one of my best friends at the time hated them. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go see what they're like. And, they sounded okay to me, but then they covered a Kate Bush song, Running Up That Hill. And I was like, dude, because I'm a big Kate Bush fan.
Did they do it justice? Because I feel like covering that song is pretty cliched at this point, and not everyone does it well.
Sure. Kate almost in a way kind of fits in with this prog discussion too. She's not actually prog rock, but she embraces a lot of the, things that prog is built on. So I always kind of think of her in terms of, Pink Floyd and these kind of things.
I was going to say, wasn't David Gilmour her mentor?
Yeah.
There's actually, I'm sure you've seen it, but for anyone listening, there's a phenomenal version of Running Up That Hill, a live version with her and David Gilmour on guitar.
Yep.
And hearing that guitar, his signature guitar tone, which is so recognizable.
Yes, it is.
It gives me chills and, dare I say, makes me a little aroused.
Oh my gosh. Well then.
You too, apparently, from that noise.
It's so funny that you can recognize Dave Gilmour anywhere, no matter. I mean, he played on a Berlin album, and he laid down, the most recognizable David Gilmour solo on this Berlin song. But people hire Dave Gilmour because they want to hear David Gilmour. They want people to know we have David Gilmour on our song.
No one can make guitar
No,
cry like he can.
that is the truth. That is the truth.
Who haven't you seen that you want to see? Prog wise,
Mm,
they're still
I
going.
have not seen. Right, I know. I can't say somebody who's.
Pink Floyd.
I have not seen Tool, and I would
Okay.
love to see a Tool show. Holy Moses, that would be amazing. How about you?
I mean, the dream is if Stephen Wilson reunites Porcupine Tree, but that's not going to
Sure.
happen. I'd really like to see Pain of Salvation.
Yeah.
They do some really interesting stuff, and they play in just about every subgenre of prog. They do a little bit of metal, they do a little bit of folk, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I think they would be really interesting and entertaining to see.
I'll tell you, I also haven't ever seen Dream Theater. I would love to go see Dream Theater sometime.
One I did want to see, and they came to Atlanta, I think, in July, was King Crimson.
Yeah.
And that was at a point with the pandemic where I didn't yet feel comfortable going to it. I still don't feel comfortable going to a show.
By all reports, that show was unbelievable.
Well, and they have 3 drummers right now because
3 drummers. That's like,
and one of whom is Gavin Harrison, who I think is probably one of the greatest living drummers at this point in time.
Yeah. I mean, that's a dream scenario for me, seeing a band with 3 drummers. That's unbelievable.
I thought I was in heaven with Genesis and they're 2 drummers, and then you
bring
in a third. The hell?
Right, exactly.
Robert Fripp is either a genius or insane, or possibly both.
Yeah. Another one was I just lost my train of thought. Not technically Prague, but another tour that came through that I missed that got rave reviews was fuck, who's the Talking Heads guy?
Oh, David Byrne.
David Byrne, thank you. I had David Gilmour in my head and I could not dislodge the Gilmour part. Yeah, I mean, that show apparently was unbelievable, and I've seen clips from it, and he performed on SNL, and it was spectacular. So I'm really ridiculously sad that I missed that tour.
He is incredibly charismatic as well.
Yeah.
So with him, it's not just the music. You look at him as a performer, and you even look at an interview with him, and just there's something really, really interesting about him as a person.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Anthony, where can people find you on the internet to hear more of your lovely, lovely voice?
You can find me on the Watchers in the Fourth Dimension podcast, where we are watching our way through all of Doctor Who from 1963 until the present day. We have just got into the second Pertwee season, or season 8, which has been fun so far, and we have just released a bonus episode talking about the really atrocious animation for the Web of Fear episode 3.
Tell us how you really feel. And I've got my little...
If you want to hear us talk about it for 20 minutes, we have a podcast episode.
Exactly. I've got my little publishing company, cosmicpress.com. I've got some Doctor Who books, and I'm publishing some stuff by other folks. Our newest release, which is still a week or two away, is by Rebecca Mabry, a debut author. Her first novel is called The Mad King, and it is wonderful, and I can't wait for people to read it. All right, so we will be back next week with another show on another topic. I don't know what that will be right now, but we will do it. So
Hopefully, we'll figure it out by next time.
usually it's Sunday afternoon when we actually decide
It
what
was
we're going to do.
today.
All right, so thanks, Anthony. Have a
Thank you
great
for
night.
having me again, Alan.
My pleasure. So everybody watching, take care. We'll see you soon.